Hello, good evening. My name is Francesca Heathcote. I'm moderating this webinar by Professor Luque. As I said, my name is Francesca Heathcote and I'm the Executive Director of the Masters in Real Estate at ESCP Business School. Just briefly, a little bit about me. I've spent the past 10 years in London, where I specialized in urban design and city planning. And more recently, about a year and a half ago, I relocated to Madrid, where I'm partner at an architectural firm, Sabe and Partners, and where I'm also, as mentioned, Executive Director of the Masters in Real Estate at ESCP. Very briefly, ESCP, as you know, is the oldest school, the oldest business school with multiple campuses around Europe, welcoming international students every year and educating them to become leaders in their industries. Again, we welcome you to these webinars, which are done in collaboration with BNP Paribas Real Estate and on this occasion with Observatorio 2030 as well. I'm going to introduce Professor Luque, who's a colleague, and he's the Associate Professor of Economics at ESCP Business School in Madrid campus, where he holds the BNP Paribas Professorship in Real Estate and serves as Director of the Monaco Real Estate Technology Innovation Program. He's also the Academic Director for the Masters in Hospitality and Tourism Management and the ESCP Institute of Real Estate Finance and Management. Prior to joining ESCP in 2018, he was real estate faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Business. In addition to this, Professor Luque has been published on several journals within the industry and has written several opinion pieces for the Financial Times, the Huffington Post, Le Monde, El País, El Mundo, Expansión, and La República, to name a few. Finally, in 2017, he was recipient of the Ideas Worth Teaching Award by the Aspen Institute Business and Society Program for his educational innovations to address affordable housing development. As mentioned, one of his most researched topics, where he's an expert, is affordable housing. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions to kick off this webinar. The first question, of course, is we'd like to hear a little bit about what got you interested and involved into the topic of housing affordability.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Francesca, for this great introduction. And I hope all our participants that are watching this webinar today are safe at home and with their families. So going back to your question, it was as a European, I went to the United States in 2012, and maybe the year after, 2013, I was working with a group of students on a project related to housing affordability, and somehow that like paper they were commenting on an individual who they wrote he was homeless, and so somehow that paper came to his hands, and he wrote me an email, and then we agreed to meet, and he was very upset about that, and of course I didn't know about what students wrote, but I apologized, and I asked if I could invite him for lunch to know more about him. It turned out that he was not like technically homeless. He was living in his van, and it turned out that he was probably one of the most humble person and one of the most intelligent persons I've ever met. He was a fantastic musician and an engineer. So that was kind of the beginning, and so I after that experience, these are the type of experiences that change the way you see life. I started working more on the topic. By the time I was faculty at University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Business in the real estate department, and so I work on research, and we did some collaborations with the housing authorities of the city of Madison and Dane County great collaborations also with non-profit organizations such as Urban League, and little by little I got into this beautiful topic, and this is something that is very rewarding, like to help society and the most vulnerable people the way we can. And in my case was this type of events, research, and collaborations with governmental institutions at the local level.
This is great to hear. Thank you so much. So in your guest lecture today, we would like to learn about the different public policies used to reduce housing barriers to vulnerable populations and working class before COVID-19. However, we are also interested in understanding how big, in your opinion, will be the impact that COVID-19 crisis on the economy in general, and what are the implications for housing affordability. If time allows, we would be also interested in learning about your thoughts on the impact of COVID on urban development. And of course, once the masterclass is finished, we look forward to welcoming any questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Francesca. I will try to answer all your questions with the presentation that I hope now you all see. In the presentation I prepared today, basically I wanted to start by sharing some thoughts and figures about like how housing affordability is in different countries. And I mean, in the top panel, you can see that surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but Greece and Spain are the countries that are less affordable in rental housing. These are like these yellow bars that we have. It's about like households spend about, on average, about 60% or more of their monthly income in rental housing. It's a big number, and we should know that the standard, the rule of thumb is that we say that housing is affordable if it's below 30% of the household's monthly income. So countries such as Greece and Spain, we have a huge problem here. Also, if we look at these like black squares, that represents the percentage of monthly income that is spent on a mortgage. So this is more for the owner-occupied housing, and again, Greece and Spain, they rank very high. It's about 50% of the borrowers' monthly income spent on a mortgage. So it's very unaffordable. That of course depends across regions, but on average, it's a very, very bad figure. And also we see like other countries such as, for instance, you can see the France for rental. The average of monthly income spent on rents for French individuals is about 20%. So it's what we call affordable. And same as before, this figure varies across regions. So like there are cities like Marseille or Paris where it's really unaffordable in some regions. So for those countries, as we can see, like France, Germany, Hungary, they are doing pretty well with rental housing. With owner-occupied housing through mortgages, it's a bit more challenging, and we can see some problems. All this is before COVID-19. And on the bottom left figure, we can see an index of housing affordability in the United States, and there was a first kind of peak during the Great Financial Crisis of 2008 and 2009, and then it kept increasing, and that was 2012, 2013, which the story I was telling you before is when I arrived, were my first years in the US, and you can see that it was a big problem. It improved a little bit, but still it's very high at historical levels. And now I will talk later about what might be the implications of COVID-19, but it seems it's going to be a bit challenging. And finally, the last piece of evidence I want to share with you today, is the big number of homeless people in the United States. There are other countries such as the UK and a little bit also in France that the numbers are quite high. In the US, it's more than 500,000 people that are homeless. And just to give you an idea of how I was feeling as a European in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a city about 300,000 people, we know that 3,000 people were homeless in Madison, and 1/3 of them, which makes 1,000, were children, which was a very sad thing to do. And that's what I was saying before, that like trying to help in this, it's very rewarding. So that's kind of some evidence about housing unaffordability across the world. And this is the different policies that we have we have some experience, policies to alleviate the housing unaffordability. So we can think about 4. The first one could be like rent control. So we manipulate prices. Second one could be zoning. So zoning means you manipulate quantities. And then you have either you work with the demand side or with the supply side. I will go into the detail for each of them, but let me start with rent control. It's very controversial. Rent control, in particular, I'm against, and I'm gonna give you some empirical evidence that support my arguments. But the story is that we have a problem, which is house prices are high, and then what politicians may decide to do to solve the problem. So let's forbid that. Let's say house prices cannot be high anymore. And then they impose this rent control. It can be a rent control on basically on the level, or it can be a rent control on the increments across time. So they basically cap those increments across time, a long time. I'm sorry. And these policies have been imposed in many countries, such as Paris, New York, Los Angeles, and London. There are other types of rent control where you oblige developers to put aside a given percentage of units, and they cannot increase rents more than whatever number. But that's it's kind of a cross subsidization, because the impact is that the other units will go up in price, which will make those other units even more unaffordable. But I will focus now on some studies that talk about rent control. And probably one of the first ones is a paper by Olsen in 1986 that he was looking at the effects of rent control in New York. And he was doing a lot of very good calculations. The paper was very well published, and he concluded that it had very limited wealth distribution. And that's kind of the idea that there is some distribution from rich to poor people, but he shows that it's very limited. And the biggest result was that there is a more than half efficiency loss in such rent control. So basically, for each dollar that we spend in rent control, or we manipulate prices, the tenant that benefits from rent control is going to only benefit half of that. So there's a huge inefficiencies in that sense. There are other papers by Professor Malpesi that he documents that the existence of a black market. So it is clear if people really want to live in an area that is subject to rent control, and they compete for those units, there can be room for black market. So the tenant is going to basically give money to the owner aside So that could be another problem. More recent papers, it's by Mense and co-authors, that they look at the effects of a second generation of rent controls in Germany. And basically what they find is that rents increase in those areas that were not subject to this rent control. So basically those people that they were living in rent control areas, of course they benefit from that, but not everyone had access to those areas. And those that didn't, they see the house prices going up. So it's basically having the opposite effect as regulators want. And another very important paper recently published by Diamond and co-authors, they show that this trend, and this is for the case of in California, in San Francisco, and they show that the impact of the short-term impact of rent control, it's, of course, it alleviates people that are kind of some stress in housing needs in the short run, but in the long run, it turns out that housing supply decreases, and they document a decrease of housing supply of 15%. And at the same time, rents go up, and it's the opposite effect that politicians are expecting. And why is that? So the story is that you are capping rents. So think of yourself as an owner of a condo, and suddenly they impose some cap on rents, and then it's gonna basically decrease the valuation and the return, the yield of your property, of your assets. For the case of Spain, there are studies by the Bank of Spain that the average return of rental housing, it's about 4.5%. But if you decrease like taxes and other considerations, it's about 2.5%. Now, if you start decreasing the future cash flows, which are the rents, and you decrease that because of the law, then the return is going to go down. At some point, it might even become negative or very small. And at that point is when the owner decides to withdraw its apartment from the market. And as a result, supply will go down. There's going to be less apartments, so it's going to be more housing is going to be scarcer, and prices will go up. So that's the effects of rent control. And so in some way, these interventionist policies that are more like regulation and planning are limiting very much the supply side, and people will not have available all the choices they would like to have. And moreover, prices go up, which is a very bad problem. So that's kind of rent control. Another policy that politicians may think about is, well, let's give money to the poor people. So we have these programs which are like housing. They're called housing vouchers. It can be either for rental housing or for owner-occupied housing. If it's for rental housing, you give a given amount of money to those individuals to pay their rents, and if it's for owner-occupied housing, basically that money goes to pay their mortgage. But that's all. So it's surprising that the medium to long-term impact on prices is that they go up. And basically is that this is the invisible hand of Adam Smith, is that prices are capturing all surplus in the market. So when those individuals have more money, the prices are going to capture that. These average prices at the market level that are aggregated information of millions of transactions will end up going up. And there is a very, very, very nice study by Carozzi, Hilbert, and Yu, a recent paper these authors at London School of Economics, that they study what is called the Help to Buy program in the United Kingdom, which is basically money going to vulnerable populations and poor to middle income people to buy a house. And they very clearly find that house prices increase because, again, the same story, the market is capturing this surplus, this additional money, and there is no discernible effect on the construction volume. So not very effective. And another problem that has been documented with these housing vouchers is that once individuals receive a given amount of money, and let's think about rental housing, they decide to go to a poor area where prices are cheap. So it might even create pockets of poverty, which is something that we want to avoid. We want to avoid those negative externalities on the children that end up being in those poor neighborhoods. So there is now an attempt to build or incentivize what is called the mixed income neighborhoods. And this brings us to the next category, which is zoning. So zoning, there are many different zonings policies, which could be like regulations on the building height or on land. So buildings cannot be taller than, say, the capital, or like we impose what is called the minimum lot size restrictions, which prevents developers from building and selling houses which are smaller than a given size. And basically this is going to create stratification and segregation of in the neighborhood. So basically this is going to be a negative aspect of this which is called exclusionary zoning. The opposite is called inclusionary zoning. So basically the housing authorities, they identify a neighborhood and they basically oblige developers to put some units being affordable. So like poor, like low to low, medium low income people, they go there. But it has a problem. It has the not in my backyard problem, which it's a very difficult problem to deal, because like other residents in that area, they basically oppose to those developments. In the US, it's quite a big problem. Then we have other public policies like the housing authorities or like the government of the city is gonna create more infrastructure, public infrastructure to develop housing. That helps a lot. Or even they facilitate public land for private developments. These are policies that are well oriented, and they increase the supply of housing. And by increasing the supply of housing, they make housing more abundant, so prices go down. That's what we want. We want prices to go down. So then the fourth category, it's about that, is how we can really use fiscal subsidies to incentivize housing supply. So there are like two possibilities. One, it's purely public housing, as in the Soviet Union in the past, where we saw those very bad examples of ugly and inefficient housing. And the big problem is that the government, it's very difficult for a central planner to understand all information that is in the market. There are, of course, like very well-known studies that the market does better than a single individual deciding where to build and how to build for millions of individuals. So this model has been abandoned, this public housing model, and there is a much more effective model, which is called this public-private partnerships. There are two big programs in the United States. In Europe, there is not so much. Countries such as Spain, they don't do that. They basically force developers to put some units affordable, and that's all. So basically what developers will end up doing is they decrease the price of those units, but on the other hand, the rest of the units in the building, the price will go up. So it's completely ineffective, and it's going to make housing even more unaffordable for those that don't have the possibility to live in those subsidized units. So these public-private partnerships are the low-income housing tax credits and the tax increment financing. So the first one is it's called LIHTC, And the idea is that like big corporations, they have the possibility to basically invest in housing, so they are becoming the equity partner in a housing development. And by doing so, they are basically alleviating the need of capital for the developer. And as a consequence, rents will go down because they need lower rent to cover their costs. That's the idea. And the tax increment financing is the second program. Here you have an example. It's a very powerful tool used in the United States, and it's a beautiful idea. Suppose that you have vacant land, you have nothing. It's valued at $47,000 a year. That's what it makes in terms of taxes for the municipality. Now you have a developer. Now it puts there a new building, a residential housing, and then it's gonna, because there is now a building, the housing authority is gonna collect higher tax revenues. Now the example is $270,000 every year. So the tax increment is this $223,000. If we consider a horizon of 23 years, basically what is this new building, this new asset is generating for the economy, for the local economy, is about $3 million. And the brilliant idea is that the municipality is going to decide to give a fraction of that or 100% of that to the developer. And then the developer is going to basically see his needs of capital going down. And that's the story. That's how you bring down rents, because the developer needs less rents to cover the cost. So this is a beautiful program that works very well in the US, and unfortunately there is not much like that in Europe. The next thing I would like to discuss is how bad will this next economic crisis will be after this health crisis of COVID-19. And so what we know is that countries such as United States the GDP growth will go down by about 6%. Other countries such as Spain, there are now some estimates about 9% in negative terms. These are huge numbers, and I'm gonna tell you why I am very worried, and then I will continue about what will be the implications for housing affordability. So the first thing we can see here in this slide is that economic, like high productivity and economic output, it's very much correlated to density. So for instance, you can see like in New York, there is a very high economic output, and this pattern repeats across the planet. The higher the density, which we think about those areas as cities, the bigger is going to be the output. So there are some economies of scale. Now this health crisis is going to we have a problem because basically it's a problem of density. We cannot have such a big density anymore. So unfortunately, I expect that the production capacity is going to go down as everyone of course expects. So that's the first point. The second point is that I would like to make this analogy that we have with the Great Depression. And in the Great Depression was extraordinary event of huge magnitudes that we haven't seen something like that until probably today. In August 1929, the Standard & Poor's 500 returns, it went down 36% until November 29. Then the market went up very quickly by 21% from November 2029 to April 1930. It went back and grew 21%, and then by April 1930 to July 1932, it went down by 83%. It was unprecedented, and we see this is the first figure on the top in this slide. You can see that that it was unprecedented, and then it remained at very low levels for decades. Now, what we are seeing today is that around end of February, say February 24, to March 16, Standard & Poor's 500 went down 32%, very similar to the first period, the first term in this Great Depression pattern that I just discussed, 32% down. Then from March 16 to April 27, the Standard & Poor's 500 went up by 24%. We have seen a great recovery in the middle of this health crisis of COVID-19. So here the question is whether later, maybe by summer or by the end of the year, we will go down and it's going to be a similar pattern to the Great Depression. Of course, it's a very different story, but just a reflection, okay? Some thoughts here. Now, what about unemployment? Unemployment in the Great Depression went up to about 24, 23, 24% around 1931, 1932. The numbers we are seeing with all these temporary layouts and unemployment is that's for the United States. It's about 24% in March. Very similar numbers in terms of unemployment, and this is very worrisome. I'm going to tell you why in a few slides. The second reason I am very worried about this crisis is the huge presence of debt. Debt, if it's too much, it's like evil. It can destroy an economy. And you can see in the graph that we have on the right of this slide that about like a decade later, so first in 1930s, we see that the share of the amount of debt as a share of GDP went up to about 40%. And then a decade later was big, what is called the Great Depression. There was even much more debt. Debt exploded and it went up to 110% as a share of GDP. But the point is that it went up to around 40% in the 30s. And what we see here right now in the United States is that we are in 2020 about 80% a share of debt in terms of GDP. So it's a huge amount of debt. And now if we look at the interventions of central banks, on the top left figure, we see that this is the Fed, the Federal Reserve balance sheet, and it was about $4.5 trillion injections in the economy. And the projections are that it will go up to $9 trillion, it will double, $9 trillion money in the economy by these Fed interventions in the secondary markets, by many reasons. I just want to focus now on the figures. It can go about 40% of US GDP just in terms of this balance sheet of the central bank. For Europe, we were at about 40%. And the estimates, of course, are going to be much higher because the European Central Bank is also following the same pattern as the Federal Reserve, and it's going to inject a lot of money in the economy. So I'm very worried about all this money and all this debt. Third reason, also related to debt, is that it's bad debt. It's in the graph on our left, in the left of the slide, we see that the amount of leveraged loans. And by leveraged loans, think about subprime loans, that like bad quality, like high loan to value loans, was going up from 2000 up to 2008 when we had the great financial crisis. Then we had a little bit of deleveraging, we were around $500 billion. And then it seems that we learned nothing. The amount of leveraged loans went up from in around 2009 with $500 billion to $1 trillion by 2018, 2019, more than $1 trillion. It's unprecedented, this amount of a huge amount of bad debt. Also, we see that, and this is very worrisome in terms of corporate debt. Now, corporations were not able to get loans from banks as much as before because the new capital regulations in the banking system. So corporations issue debt with bonds, so these corporate bonds. And what we know now is that half of the world's corporate debt, it's BBB. That means it's junk, is very close to default. You just need a trigger to bring all this debt to default. And here, I think it's a bit more worrisome than in the Great Financial Crisis, because in the Great Financial Crisis, we had houses with debt that they were not able to pay, and then those fancy subprime mortgage-backed securities went default, right? Here, it's corporations going default. It's the capacity of production of the economy disappearing from the economy, and this is something that that's why I think this could be a big crisis in terms of magnitudes. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have something similar in the months to come to what we saw in the Great Depression. And the trigger would be debt and unemployment. Now, let me focus a little bit more on this question of housing affordability, but now after COVID-19. And what we have seen is that countries have taken extraordinary measures with respect to pre-pandemic days. We have seen moratoriums on evictions. We have seen rent caps, this rent control policy I mentioned before, reliefs for mortgage defaulters, and assistance to homeless populations, among other policies. Now, in the United States, we know that many LIHTC, low-income housing tax rates projects, for the housing projects that were built to provide housing that is affordable for the population, are going through a big struggle, because we expect that 50% that the revenues they collect is going to go down by 50%, and it's going to be very difficult or impossible to service mortgage debt, to pay for the resident services and other costs that might be associated to COVID-19, such as sanitizing and cleaning those properties. So there's a problem also for the owners of the properties. And there are some policies that have been proposed. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. 2 of them are in the short run. The third one is for the long run. In the short run, we want to have a program that is directly, specifically to business owners that operate and own rental housing, so that they are able to pay their debt and they are able to pay for the operational costs that they have on a daily basis. This can go in the form of say, for example, a 10-year loan with no interest. Now it's possible because of these central bank injections, and will be the owner will get this benefit, this mortgage that will cover debt and other things until when it's needed. And also we want to have immediate help to those residents and vulnerable populations that are in need. That's for the short run, and that's something that is to avoid a disaster in the society. In the long run, we want to have a stimulus package that provides housing through the supply channel. We don't want to have rent controls or other policies on the demand side for the long run. For the long run, we want to create abundance of housing so prices go down. Now, I want to discuss a little bit the role of unemployment. So in this graph, we see that in the graph on the top left, we see that the rise in unemployment during the Great Financial Crisis in 2009 it's a great experiment for us to understand what are the implications. And the implications were that earnings went down significantly, as we can see on the top right figure. Those that lost their jobs and didn't got a new job, they saw their earnings going from $3,500 per month to $500 per month. So you can see, of course, there is a big need there for help and intervention. I'm going to now focus on, instead of rental housing, I'm going to focus on how to help those owners that own properties with a mortgage, because there might be, think about the working class, that they get a mortgage, things go very well. In the last 5-10 years, things went very well. And so they got a mortgage, they have a family, and now they may lose their job. So here's the story. Think about a household with an average monthly income of $1,450. It's very similar to the case of Michigan on the table below. Okay, so that's kind of we may want to think about this as the unemployment insurance. That's the money that house is going to get every month. And this household, the same household, has a mortgage about $1,200 every month. That's what he needs to pay. If there is no other subsidies, this household, after paying the mortgage, has only left $250. It's not enough to pay for food, for schools, and for other basic needs. So you need to top this up with additional subsidies. And here the example is that if in addition we give this household a housing voucher that covers the mortgage payment of $1,200, then this household is gonna see in his bank account $1,015 to spend. And you may wanna think of maybe a single mom with 2 children that has to cover those payments. So this is the type of potential interventions, right? And we want to see if this makes sense or not, right? And what we really want, the question here is, we want to save taxpayers' money. How costly these interventions are in the short run, right? So what we know is that in 2009 great financial crisis, like, taxpayers were responsible for 50% of all mortgage losses. 50%. So out of $1, 50 cents are out of $1 in mortgage losses, 50 cents is paid by the taxpayers. Now, if we consider a mortgage with a face value of $100,000, the mortgage loss that is covered by the taxpayers is about $50,000. Now, on the contrary, now suppose that we want to have a housing voucher for this household. So think about a scenario with a 6 months unemployment. We have to pay this household this $1,200 that I mentioned before. That makes total $7,200. So compared to the $50,000 for that very specific household, there is a big saving in taxpayers' money. So the first policy of like with the housing voucher, we are saving money if we go into this crisis, the one we went with the great financial crisis. So this is something to think about. The last part of my presentation is it's about the urban transformation. And here we know that housing and unaffordability is related to urban density. We know that the more dense the city, the higher is going to be the price. We see that for the city of Chicago, these beautiful graphs on our right. So that's something to keep in mind. And if we want to have housing more affordable, we may want to have some of those people to move them away from the city, and so they live in other areas and they commute. So what is the impact of this crisis at the same time? We have this digital transformation, something that everyone is talking about, digital transformation of companies. Now consider the following example. We have workers that now they can spend 3 days per week at home because they have this kind of remote working, which is possible due to internet and video conferences and so on. So they are basically saving 60% of their time in the office. So if this happens for the whole company, it's an extreme case, but let's consider that example. If it happens for the whole company, we are basically gonna save 60% of the space in broad terms. So there might be a transformation of the office space. And now I think in terms of commuting costs, like households, they spend, like, think in a big city, 2 hours per day in commuting at least, 3 days working at home. That makes 6 hours per week in basically saving that time and money. That represents about 15% in commuting costs. It's a big saving which can be transformed in increasing productivity, in benefits for the family. Birth rates might increase, and other reasons that might be related to this example. So we may see that because commuting costs go down, people may choose to live further away from downtown. And this is a very classical problem in economics that has been very well documented. Like these new revolutions in technology in the previous century, such as highways, railroads, automobiles, airplanes, streetcar, all that was a revolution. And what this implied was that people had lower commuting costs because they moved faster towards downtown. So they were able to live further away from downtown. And that's kind of this sprawl that we saw, and it was very well documented in the literature for urban economics. And a very good example is for example, the subway. The first subway in continental Europe was at the end of the 19th century in Budapest, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And there is, of course, work what I was mentioning before, documents that this favors sprawl, and basically you are bringing people from further away to downtown. This is a classical urban economics analysis that the bid-rent curve basically becomes flatter, and this allows for having like residential space with a higher distance from downtown, and also because now we are reaching like more population that are far away, the labor supply may increase or wages may go down in the city. That's what we basically translating what I said into urban economics. So with this, I'm done. I want to conclude these slides with a beautiful picture that I saw once in Madison, Wisconsin, of a homeless girl, which was 7 years old, and all she was drawing was about housing. So we really need to think carefully on how to alleviate and solve this problem, but we have to be smart. We don't want to do like some policies that end up having the opposite effect. And that's why, and that's how research may open our eyes. Very good. So I think now it's going to be time for questions.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Professor Luque. I'm Kian Salzberg. I'm a Master 2 student from ESCP. And thank you, ESCP, for giving me the platform to ask a question today. I've written my master thesis on affordable housing. So I would like to use this platform to ask a few questions on the back of your current presentation. And 2 questions, actually. One of them would be related to the urban developments you just presented, and one would be more on the speculative side, related to the central bank intervention. And so first, as I've seen, you have made a parallel to the 1929 crisis and as well to urban planning. I would like to ask if you think the moment we should see a shift towards more working from home, freeing up commuting time, maybe having more interest in having a larger flat outside of the city instead of having like a big flat near the office in the city center. Do you think the moment has come for also once again making a kind of parallel with the 1929 crisis for big infrastructure policy to guarantee job creation and as well creating new hubs surrounding our big cities at the moment? Is this the time for this? Or?
Yeah, well, Thank you, Kian. It's a great question. I think there are two parts in your question, if I understood it correctly. The first part is related to the urban transformation story I was discussing before, and with the same example that this person that works now 3 days per week at home. There's going to be demand that is farther away from downtown, as I was arguing before. So there's going to be new developments farther away from downtown, and those new residential developments may include some common working areas or kind of this co-working space. So I wouldn't be surprised if the residential market they basically find new products to satisfy these demands. That's one part of the first part of the question. And the second part of your question is if I'm thinking that there's going to be more public infrastructure
yes,
done.
Exactly.
And
if it's a moment.
So probably yes. We have seen that the size of the government is increasing a lot, and I would be very careful by distinguishing between what is just pure spending of money so that they try to create jobs. And that's a policy that really failed in Spain in the great financial crisis. They said, well, let's do this Keynesian policy of spending money. And then that was 2009, beginning of 2010, the government debt in Spain went up significantly. And then we had the European sovereign debt crisis, and we were already so much indebted that we became one of those countries that were suffering from the crisis. So, I mean, what I would suggest is to channel, to be very careful with that, to decrease that as much as we can, and we want to target some public infrastructures that provide housing.
Okay. So it's more a matter of now creating as well long-term value through the added debt.
Correct. It's about creating value and increasing housing supply if we're going to spend that money.
Okay. And so just on a side note to the other participants, I guess now is the time to submit written questions. So I just in the meantime ask another question. So the one related to the central bank effects. Indeed, we raised already the rent controls, but one of the effects I want to discuss is are we now kind of as I already said, governments are getting bigger and central banks are so very interventionist at the moment. Do you think that due to this quantitative easing programs, real estate prices will grow even more? I mean, will we constantly see a continued growth, although all the other parts of the market are falling down?
Yes, I think it could be a very clear possibility that now we have more money. They are printing money, and once you print money, then those bills are more abundant. So there is more of the same thing, and this basically this abundance is gonna basically decrease the value of money, and because the value of money is going down, the value of the buildings in terms of the same money is gonna go up. Which is basically what we call inflation. So I wouldn't be surprised if all these QE policies, quantitative easing policy by central banks, is going to end up by increasing inflation.
So is it also, could it then, I mean, somehow I was thinking if the housing prices increase, right? So potentially also leading to a decrease in homeowners. On the one side, we would see shifting towards the rental market, but with inelastic supply. But then we could have an increase in rents, but which could also be capped, right? So it would be some kind of crazy, completely unregulation of, I mean, complete mess up of the market. I mean.
Yes, completely agree with you. You explained it very well. I think if that scenario happens where it translates into inflation, because in the previous crisis with the great financial crisis, the problematic asset was real estate. But in most of the crises that we had in history, real estate is a hedge. for inflation. So people basically invest in real estate, so real estate prices go up, and we already have a housing affordability crisis, and we will see even things even more complicated. So I fully agree with your analysis.
Okay, and just on the side with potentially landlords withdrawing the. Do you think if they see the value of their asset increasing on the sale market, could they also be like even more somehow pushed to sell it on the market and withdraw it from the rental market? Do you think this could be?
You're saying that if house prices are going up, yeah, I see what you mean. Well, it's not for sure, because it depends on how rents will go up, right?
Yeah, because usually, let's say my rents are capped, and I see that I could sell it even more. Do you?
Oh yes, yeah. That's a great point, Ken. It's a fantastic point, because what you're saying is that on the one hand we have rent control, so there is that cap on rents. And on the other hand, we see that like house prices are going up because of inflation and all these things we have discussing. So people will convert their houses, will withdraw, and basically invest in owner-occupied housing. That's possible. That's possible.
Okay. Perfect.
Very good. Okay, Thank you. We may want to go for other questions from the audience. Yes.
Hello everyone. So we have received a couple of questions from the audience. I'm just getting them. So this was really interesting. So thank you so much for your time, Kian and Jaime. So we've received a question from Rajiv Shabra from BNP Paribas Real Estate Madrid Intern 2020. Thank you for your question. So what shortcomings are we recognizing in the corporate debts, and what can we learn from it in order to avoid a similar situation in the future?
Well, I think that's of course a very difficult question, but it's very pertinent. It's all about that. I mean, one thing is the coronavirus crisis in the short term, and then what are the implications, because we have with this economy with huge amounts of debt. That's a very good question, and I think that we tried that in the past. After the great financial crisis, we tried to regulate banks not to have excessive debts in terms of mortgage lending and so on, or bad debt. But what we observe is that we have this emergence of shadow banking. And now like half of mortgages in the United States are originated by shadow banks, which are by definition not regulated. So these are not depository institutions. So that's very difficult. We tried that in the past, and the market always finds a way to go against, to issue new debt. I think there is a lot. We should do a lot of pedagogy, educational stuff like this one, because we need to show to the population that like all these interventions and public infrastructures and investments and so on, that people get that through that, it implies that we need to pay this back. And if it's too much debt, like companies and individuals go bankrupt. So it's unfortunately, it's not an easy question. I think it's more about the mentality that really changed in the 50s and 60s in the US, and of course in Europe it came a little bit later. But this attitude towards that people live because of that, and not because on a daily basis with their monthly income.
Of course. Thank you, Jaime. So the next question we have is from Alexander Pinjara. And it's, first of all, thank you very much for this informative presentation. My question is a rather practical one. Supposing you wanted to invest in apartments to offer them for rental, would you buy our respective housing right now or wait for a certain period of time during this crisis? If yes, what European city do you still see attractive in 2020 as a place of investment, taking urban developments and buying price rental ratio into account? Highly appreciated. So,
Francesca, I need you to help me a little bit with, I didn't get all of the questions. So can you
happily.
formulate it?
I think, the world, I mean, up until recently, the world was undergoing what we all know as urbanization. So since the last few years, more than 50% of the world's population has moved and lives in cities. The world has become more urban than rural, okay? We don't know what's going to happen post-COVID, but principally cities are the, let's say, centers of jobs, services, infrastructure, exchange, and serve a globalized world. So I can't predict the future, but I do think that while rural places are going to recover some importance due to the situations we are living, and there's a lot of room actually to explore that further, cities are going to still be quite central and key to the world economy and to world, culture, economy, education, you can name it. Basically, city is a pole for it. What European city might still be attractive for investment for rental? I think what is key to look at is what cities have low rentals so that your investment is lower, but also what type of attractors are not going to change in the immediate future. So maybe while tourism might decrease, international tourism, national tourism might increase, or international students that move to international cities around Europe also might need a demand and a supply of housing to accommodate them.
I see.
So
I see.
the indicators that are constant and that are not going to change excessively, hopefully, due to the actual circumstances, I think.
Yeah,
but Jaime, if you'd like to join.
And now I get the question, and thank you for such a great explanation. I agree with all you said. And in terms of like what makes rental housing like more attractive, it's all about yields. So those cities that are unaffordable, they provide high returns. So the market, if you let the market operate and work as without any interventions, you will see capital going there. It's going to be transformed to new housing, and there's going to be more supply of housing, and rents will go down. That's the invisible hand of Adam Smith. And now the second possibility is that you see house prices very high in your city. You say impose rent control, so you don't have investors, so you don't solve the problem through the market. So you have more housing. Then you have to start creating all this public housing, which is very inefficient, and that's what I was mentioning before. So I'm very much into helping the short run, but let the market fix the problem.
So always on the same similar theme, we have another question about whether we see prices decreasing in the short term.
Probably there could be such scenario. I wouldn't be surprised neither. And it's all about the demand. So if we start seeing huge amounts of unemployment in Spain, unemployment may go up to 30%. There are like some figures about that, crazy, and huge percentage of the population is dependent on subsidies, government subsidies, on one way or another. If the population becomes poorer, probably this is going to have an impact on prices. But I wouldn't say that this is going to make housing more affordable. Always is in relative terms, the income of the individuals with respect to prices. So it's possible that even they go down and the city becomes even more unaffordable.
And always a bit similar on the same tone. If the interest rates are so low, do you think the real estate market is going to be overvalued over the next year?
Probably. It depends on the supply versus the demand. The demand is what I said before, like lower demand for housing and real estate in general may depress a little bit prices, but on the other hand, like all these central bank injections is gonna create inflation, and And we need to basically see what is going to be the effect that dominates. But I insist that it's always in relative terms with respect to people's income.
Okay, great. So I think we are running out of time. So I would invite everyone to stay for a few more minutes because we are going to stream a video that introduces you to our latest master's, which is a master's in real estate. We're both Professor Jaime and myself are working on, and which is starting in September 2020 in the fall. And we'd love you to stay and watch it and get in touch if you like to have any more information about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime.
Real estate, it's not just a real estate consultancy in which I am currently, but it's urbanism, it's the corporate finance part, it's debt, it's everything that has to do with the infrastructure precisely of a city.
We are going to offer modules on real estate finance, real estate management, real estate technology, in particular PropTech, real estate development. Also, we are going to include case studies on residential, commercial, and logistics, taught by very prestigious professionals in the sector.
Smart cities, urban design, and real estate development are currently the key pillars in shaping the future real estate entrepreneurs of the world.
So it's a bit of a synergy between the academic learning and the application of the work itself. And this match was possible because of ESCP, which gave me the opportunities to apply to companies such as this one.
If you want to succeed within the real estate industry, you must undertake the Masters in Real Estate at ESCP, which is split across 2 campuses, Madrid and London, giving you a very open and global view of this industry.
The real value of ESCP is not only the international background of the students, but the possibility to live in the other campuses which we have. It's a baggage of culture, of languages, of emotions, and of possibilities which multiply one campus in currently 6, and in the future even more.
If your passion is to become a professional in the real estate sector, I really recommend you to enroll in this master at ESCP.
I made the right choice.